for the job than Flynn. That was based on the experience that President Obama had with Flynn when he was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. But last night, Yates testified that Flynn had been picked up talking to the Russians and that the Russians knew Flynn had lied to the vice president about the content of his conversations. Listen to what she said here.
That created a compromise situation, a situation where the national security advisor essentially could be blackmailed by the Russians. Finally, we told them that we were giving them all of this information so that they could take action, the action that they deemed appropriate.
The aspect of the hearing that President Trump is focused on, though, is the unmasking of Trump officials. The former director of national intelligence, James Clapper, testified that he had asked for the identity of one Trump official to be unmasked. Both he and Yates said that they had seen the names of unmasked Trump officials in intelligence reports. Watch this exchange.
Did either of you ever review classified documents in which Mr. Trump, his associates, or members of Congress had been unmasked?
Oh, yes.
You have. Can you give us details here?
No, I can't.
Ms. Yates, have you?
Yes, I have, and no, I can't give you details.
The question that President Trump has is who leaked Flynn's name to the Washington Post right after the White House was warned about it. He tweeted out this morning, quote, "Ask Sally Yates under oath if she knows how classified information got into the newspapers soon after she explained it to the White House counsel." Yates and Clapper both denied leaking Flynn's name or acting as an anonymous source for any news stories. House Speaker Paul Ryan said this morning that is a question that's being investigated in congressional hearings. Listen to what he said.
That is a crime, and so that is taking classified information, unclassifying it, and leaking it out. That is something somebody in the Obama administration decided to do, and it did happen. So the question of this investigation is to get to the bottom of that.
Then in the hearing last night, both Clapper and Yates said there is so far no evidence that there was any collusion between Trump campaign officials and the Russians in terms of the attempts to influence the U.S. election. Jenna?
John, thank you.
Former Acting Attorney General Yates also telling lawmakers that she expected the White House to take action after her warning about Flynn's contacts with the Russians and the danger that could pose down the road.
The Russians also knew that General Flynn had misled the vice president and others, because in the media accounts, it was clear from the vice president and others that they were repeating what General Flynn had told them, and that this was a problem because not only did we believe that the Russians knew this, but that they likely had proof of this information. And that created a compromise situation, a situation where the national security advisor essentially could be blackmailed by the Russians.
Jerry Seib is executive editor of the executive Washington editor, I should say, of the Wall Street Journal. I hope I gave you a promotion there, Jerry.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Pretty astounding stuff we were listening to in this testimony from the former acting attorney general, talking about wiretaps of the Russian ambassador that snared a national security advisor. This is the stuff out of a spy novel.
Yeah, it was pretty compelling testimony, and not a particularly good day for the White House, I think. You know, the whole Michael Flynn story is one I'm sure that they wish would just go away, but it's not going to. You know, there's a lot of drama wrapped up in it. I think the Democrats on the committee were focused on the question of what did Michael Flynn do and why was he misleading the vice president, who could then mislead the American public. Republicans were focused on the unmasking of his name in these intelligence intercepts. And so you had a hearing with a lot of drama and a lot of tension, but ships passing in the night at the same time.
At the same time, it has all come to be viewed under a partisan lens. And when you're talking about matters of national security, that becomes problematic.
Well, I think so, although the underlying issue here is actually one there's less partisanship on, which is the question of Russian interference in the 2016 election. I think there's actual bipartisan concern that that's a very troubling precedent and that it ought not to be let to continue. I think one of the problems yesterday was that sort of got lost in the conversation because it became, as I said, two conversations, one about what Michael Flynn did and didn't do with the Russian ambassador and one about how that didn't become known out of a classified document. And so the underlying question, which I think is actually one both parties are concerned about, Russian interference and potential collusion in an American presidential election, is kind of lost in the conversation right now. It won't be forever, but for right now.
So Sally Flynn testified that very early, the first week of the Trump administration, she went to the White House counsel's office and told him of her concerns. Nothing happened until the story broke publicly 18 days later in the Washington Post. Now, that would suggest leaks, obviously. And when somebody didn't see any result from her meeting with McGahn, somebody leaked it to the press, right?
Well, it looks that way. And the question Democrats were boring in on is why was there this gap between the disclosure of this information to the then new Trump White House and the action that was ultimately taken, which was dismissing Mr. Flynn. And Republicans were focused, as you suggest, on what it is that why nothing happened until there was a leak to the press. So, the leaks happened after the Obama team had left and when the Trump team came in, but there were plenty of Obama holdovers. And so, it's going to be a long time, I suspect, before we get to the bottom of both those questions. Why was there a gap between the time when this was known and action was taken in the White House, and where did the original stories come from?
President Trump is casting some blame, at least, on the Obama administration for having approved General Flynn's national security clearance or security clearance. Does that argument hold weight?
I don't think that one flies too well. Look, I mean, he had a security clearance from the Obama administration. That's correct. When he was director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, that was renewed in 2016. But he also had taken office as the national security advisor for the Trump administration, obviously. But that was before the issue we're talking about was really known or had been vetted. And so I'm not sure that the fact that he had a security clearance and the fact that he then subsequently got into trouble, really, those things don't really mash up in the timeline.
Little noticed in all of this hubbub over the past week or so is the president's announcement that he's heading to Saudi Arabia and the Vatican next month. You write in the Wall Street Journal that this could be a real opportunity for him and, frankly, for that troubled part of the world.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting situation. As you suggest, it's gotten very little attention. But he's going to start his overseas journeys as president by going to Saudi Arabia, which is an interesting start, then to Israel, and then to the Vatican. And I think what's interesting about the situation in the Middle East is you actually have a kind of a strategic alignment among America's closest traditional friends there. The Saudis, the Egyptians, and the Israelis, they all see twin existential threats from Iran and from the Islamic State. They're in alignment about that, and they're also, at the moment at least, on good terms with the new American administration. That creates some interesting possibilities that have never really existed before. Now, everything in the Middle East is complicated, and great ideas and great hopes are almost always dashed. But at the moment, there's a reason to go have this conversation about whether there's a possibility to have a new kind of security alignment that tries to isolate Iran and that stems the Islamic State tide, and that's what the president presumably is going to go do.
Yeah, we will be watching closely when President Trump makes this first overseas trip. Gerald Seib, Wall Street Journal. Thank you.
Thanks. Happy to be with you.
And now this Fox News Alert, a big headline coming out of South Korea as we had the election results for that country, with the liberal candidate Moon Jae-in now claiming victory as the projected winner, ending a decade of conservative rule inside that country. Exit polls show him with nearly a 20-point lead over his two main rivals who have now conceded the race. And the win comes as the ousted former president awaits a corruption trial and could spark a major change in policy with nuclear-armed North Korea. The new president has blasted the hardline approach of the conservative government and favors engagement. He also opposed the installation of the anti-ballistic missile system the United States brought to South Korea just recently to protect areas like Seoul from a strike.
Outrage at airports all across the country. Long lines and canceled flights, just part of the new normal in travel. But what caused this all-out brawl? Why passengers are furious and one airline is blaming its pilots. Plus, the White House is considering a new tactic in Afghanistan that is a drastic departure from current policy there. Details on that next.
2017 is going to be another tough year for the valiant Afghan security forces and the international troops.
Three-month-old Travis Robinson was born with an enlarged heart and needed a heart transplant to survive. His doctors at Levine Children's Hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina, placed him on a Berlin heart to help maintain blood flow and keep his organs working until a new heart became available.
I'll never forget when Dr. Wallace came to us and he said, "I just want to let you know that your son's heart is very sick."
This is 3-year-old Aiden Ellis. He was admitted to the same hospital for a serious heart defect just 2 weeks after Travis. Aiden was also put on the same mechanical heart device 2 weeks behind Travis.
The hardest part of this is the waiting for the donor.
These mothers, Allison and Miriam, met by chance in the hallway and quickly formed a strong bond that few parents ever could.
Always check on each other, and then it would come to you sitting in the room with each other, and then it was, well, if I'm not here, can you keep an eye out on baby Travis? So it kind of evolved into a sisterhood.
As time went on and weeks turned into months, both families worried over when they get the call. For their child's heart, the average wait time is between 2 to 6 months.
Those are both tough kids, and unfortunately, were dealt a bad hand early on. And I think both of those children, as well as their families, have acquired a unique strength.
During a time that was incredibly difficult, Allison and Miriam continued to lean on each other for extra support.
I had my husband and I had my family, but as a mom, it's a completely different set of challenges that you can't really relate to unless you are a mom.
After 4 months in the hospital, Travis's parents got the call they've been waiting for.
The news for us was just amazing, and we are forever indebted to the family that made that selfless decision.
And as fate would have it, Aiden's mom got the same call just 2 weeks later.
Being on the Berlin, to me it was a temporary fix, but now we're on the home stretch to true healing.
Travis and Aiden both had successful transplant surgeries. While their heart-wrenching hospital journey may be over, their mother's friendship will last a lifetime.
We, from beginning to end, have had a bond that you couldn't make it up if you tried. You couldn't time it more perfectly if you tried.
Allison and Miriam are now advocates for donor donation. For more information on how to become a donor, visit organdonor.gov. I'm Dr. Manny, Fox News.
Right now, new concerns over a series of artificial islands off the coast of North Korea and what their purpose might be. Satellite images suggest there are military installations on those islands, and experts warn they could be used as launch sites for nuclear missiles. But some officials dispute that argument, saying the islands are too small to move missiles around and are most likely for farming. North Korea has struggled to feed its people for decades.
Sounds like there's more questions to ask there. An American troop buildup could be in the works for Afghanistan as the president's top military advisors recommend an aggressive strategy to push back a resurging Taliban and the growing strength of the Islamic State. Defense Secretary Mattis recently reaffirming the American commitment to fighting for stability there.
Within the new American administration, of course, our review in Washington is a dialogue with Secretary Tillerson and the President and his staff in the White House. And I'd say that we're under no illusions about the challenges associated with this mission. 2017 is going to be another tough year for the valiant Afghan security forces and the international troops who have stood and will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with Afghanistan against terrorism.
For more on this, we're joined by Rick Grenell, former advisor to 4 U.S. ambassadors to the UN. Rick, it's great to have you back on the program for this. And I'd like to rely on your expertise at the UN dealing with a host of different issues, as well as your expertise developing narratives. So this is where we're going to focus. As you look at Afghanistan, how would you describe to our viewers where Afghanistan fits in the list of priorities that the United States is confronting?
Well, look, first of all, we have to say that this has been a very difficult problem, and so no one should be under any illusion, as Secretary Mattis says, that this is going to have easy answers. If we had a chance to have easy answers to fix this problem, it would have been fixed a long time ago. So with that being said, I think we have to understand that a military surge is not going to work unless we have a diplomatic surge. In order for the military to be successful, we have to have diplomats who understand a strategy, have a very specific plan of action, and they have to surge as well. We have to have the diplomatic surge at the same time. The military is ready. The military is always ready, and I think General Mattis Secretary Mattis is showing us that they are ready to move in and do what needs to be done. The State Department is not ready. All of the ideas that we have implemented from a diplomatic standpoint in Afghanistan have failed. We need to be honest about that. We've run out of ideas at the State Department. We don't have the leaders, new ideas at the State Department yet helping Secretary Tillerson. I think that we need to make sure that Secretary Tillerson has as many diplomats as possible with new ideas to surge this at the same time. And my fear is that we're not quite there.
We have 16 years of experience of men and women who have experience on the ground in Afghanistan. Perhaps they can tap some of those folks who have spent some time on the ground to help with some diplomatic efforts. I want to just go to the word surge so our viewers know. President Obama withdrew about 1,400 troops in December, right before he left office. So the numbers that are being suggested are around 3,000 as a low base and a few thousand more than that. So I just want our viewers to know when we say surge, I think sometimes we have a vision of what that might look like, and we're looking at a little bit of a lower number on that. But go back to your point about how we win in Afghanistan. Rick, if you had to advise the military how to empower their narrative to the American people as well as to our enemies, what would you advise them?
Well, look, I think that we've got to utilize the military in the best way that they're trained, right? They're sending in bombs. They're sending in the military component in Afghanistan. They do a great job of that, but we cannot ask them to be doing the diplomacy as well. That's the State Department, and we have to have trained diplomats that know how to go in and negotiate. Sometimes you can get someone who can do both.
What would they be negotiating for? I mean, if you're saying that there's no military solution, is there an equal argument to saying, well, listen, there may not be a diplomatic solution?
Well, I think that it's a great question, Jenna, and I think that there is a solution going forward if we can be honest with ourselves of what we need out of Afghanistan. We need to make sure that that's not a safe haven for terrorism, and that we have access in Afghanistan to the other parts of the world when it comes to commerce, so that we have a road, if you will. We have access so that our commerce and our trade can be successful through Afghanistan. That's a limited scope. We don't have to have the entire country of Afghanistan in a very specific way that the United States wants them to be. They don't have to, believe the same way that we do, for instance. But we do have to make sure that it's not a safe haven for terrorists, and that we have our U.S. priority of getting access, a commerce access road, if you will.
Commerce access
road. So I think if we're honest about that limited goal, that can be accomplished.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then one has to ask the question of whether or not American lives are meant to get a commerce road and perhaps stave off some terrorism in that area. So those are some big questions. Rick, great to have you on the program. Thank you.
Again, it's a difficult situation, but we got to forge through.
A disturbing warning for police officers in one major city, while officials say all-out war is breaking out on the streets of Chicago and no one is safe. And the ball is now in the Senate's court on health care. Republicans are optimistic things will move along quickly. Our panel debates next.
The insurers are pulling out very, very quickly, and we need to show the insurers that there's a better system coming.
A brewing gang war in Chicago has police there on edge. The department now warning officers about gang members armed with high-powered rifles that could pierce bulletproof vests. Those rifles are reportedly a more common weapon among street gangs. They were used to kill 3 people over the weekend and in the drive-by shootings of 2 undercover officers last week. The police department is flooding the area with officers and tactical teams in an effort to try to curb the violence.
Well, now to the next steps for repealing and replacing Obamacare. With word President Trump will let Majority Leader Mitch McConnell take the lead on passing a health care bill in the Senate. House Speaker Paul Ryan sounding optimistic about the action in the Senate, telling this to Fox and Friends this morning.
the legislation should not take that long. Hopefully it takes a month or two to get it through the Senate.
Really? You think it'll happen by the fall?
Hopefully it takes a month or two, because we need to give people the ability to plan. The insurers are pulling out very, very quickly, and we need to show the insurers that there's a better system coming.
Joining us now, Josh Holmes, former chief of staff to Senator Mitch McConnell. He also helped coin the term repeal and replace. And Jim Kessler, former legislative and policy director to Senator Chuck Schumer and senior vice president for policy and a co-founder of the Third Way. It's great to have you both. So first things first, let's talk a little bit about, Josh, the way forward and the timeline as Speaker Ryan mapped out for our viewers. Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, you know what? The one thing I'm absolutely sure of is that Senate Republicans aren't going to be sucked into an artificial timeline here. They're going to be laser focused on the policy itself. I mean, this is something that's so important to the American people. It's just vitally important that they get it right. And setting an artificial timeline that sort of jams everything together to try to get over the finish line isn't something they're particularly interested in. One thing that I think is really remarkable about this debate, though, if you consider the fact that Obamacare is literally imploding in front of us, the fact that the architects of Obamacare are sitting around admiring their handiwork and not helping out and trying to become a part of this debate, and Democrats have let Republicans alone try to handle this, I think is a really cynical political strategy and something the American people really can't appreciate.
That sounds like a dare, Jim. Do you want to respond to that? I think he's talking. I don't know. I think he might be talking to you.
Yes, I think he is.
What's your response to that?
Josh, I think that Chuck Schumer and Democrats will do as much to help Mitch McConnell as Mitch McConnell helped Democrats on the original Affordable Care Act. Look, here's the problem. So, first of all, Paul Ryan's timeline, nobody in the Senate believes that is possible. The Senate, they can't take out the garbage in 2 months, let alone pass a major overhaul of the health care bill. This is going on for months and months and months. I'm skeptical that they'll be able to get to the finish line because, frankly, Obamacare is more popular today than it ever has been by every objective poll going out there. And the Republican replacement bill it's about as popular as Kim Jong-un. So they got some problems going forward.
Okay, now that you're both so optimistic, let's talk about solutions perhaps. And I just want our viewers to know, there's a lot going on with the bill that the House passed. But as of right now, our health care is not impacted by that bill as of yet. And one thing that both sides seems to be agreeing on is that whatever comes out of the Senate will look different than what the House passed. You're both nodding. I feel like that's a victory for us. Here's the question, Jim, and actually let me go to Josh first. What do you think healthcare will look like? You're both saying that the timeline is going to be further off, but we want to know what to expect. What do you think it's going to look like?
Well, one of the reasons why the American people are rightly skeptical anytime Washington talks about health care is because it was just a couple years ago where President Obama promised everybody that they'd have lower premiums and better access. And what happened during Obamacare is they have higher premiums and worse access. A third of the counties across the country only have one insurer available to them. So anytime there's a politician talking about health care, they're rightly a little skeptical about it. So I'm not surprised that people are wanting to get a good look at this. Okay, so Jim,
let me just ask you about that because you're famous. You're the guy, repeal and replace, the term. You're the one that we say over and over again. I mean, you should have trademarked that thing. You really could have made some money. If that is the same accusation for Republicans, and you've seen this story play out, then what's their response to that about whether or not, the average American's health care is going to get better?
Well, I think that's the goal of this whole effort, right? In politics, be darned, you've got a House Democratic Conference and sat there and applauded and sang about their political prospects while not participating at all in the creation of a new health care system that is hopefully going to address some of the problems that they couldn't. Now, I would like to hope that the Senate Democrats would have a different point of view, but it doesn't appear that they do.
Jim, what about that? You said, the Republicans didn't help us, we're not going to help them. But, if just listening to that, it's like, all right, politics as usual. Where do you think Democrats can actually plug in and help here? If the priority is actually the American people and not politics?
Right. So this is what I think is going to happen. So first of all, parts of Obamacare is working very, very well. There's a lot more people who are insured that weren't insured before, and parts of it are not going well, and that is some people in some states on the individual exchanges. I believe what's going to happen is the Senate is not going to be able to pass a bill, and they certainly aren't going to be able to pass a bill that the House can pass, and that effort of repeal and replace will collapse. When that is done, then there will be efforts to bipartisan efforts, and there are good ideas that Republicans have and good ideas that Democrats have to actually fix the exchanges, do the tinkering under the hood that needs to be done to make this work. And that will happen, maybe not this Congress, but the next
Do you think we need new people to do that, though, Jim? Do you think everybody needs to be voted out of office to get some new energy to actually achieve the goal that you're stating?
Well, I think I would rather be a Democrat in a red state supporting Obamacare now than a Republican in a purple state repealing it. But I think what's going to happen, you will see some ramifications in the midterms, and then people will come to their senses and do something. And
let me just say quickly that if you've got an entire insurance market that's collapsing, you're going to need a lot more than tinkering under the hood.
All right. Well, we'll see. We'll see what next term we come up with. Okay. So you got repeal and replace, Josh. Jim, your turn next time. I'm sure you've said a lot of famous things, and we'll make sure to highlight that. Look forward to having you both back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Much more on repealing and replacing Obamacare in the Senate ahead when we go live to Capitol Hill and talk with one senator on what the road ahead looks like for passing that bill. Plus, well, right now it is the Senate's turn on health care, and it could be a rocky road ahead because Republicans have a very slim majority there, and what pleases conservative Republicans might turn off the moderates. But House Speaker Paul Ryan tells Fox and Friends his colleagues in the Senate are already hard at work.
I did call Mitch McConnell and said, the ball's in your court now. We're excited to get working with you guys. They were already preparing a plan, meaning a group to get this processed over there, because we made a promise. We made a promise to the people who sent us to Congress that we would repeal and replace this failing law with patient-centered health care to get lower premiums, lower prices. And yes, we have multiple ways of making sure that a person with a pre-existing condition, with a catastrophic illness, gets affordable coverage.
Joining us now, Senator Roy Blunt, Republican from Missouri, who is the vice chairman of the Senate Republican Conference, also a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Senator, it's good of you to spend some time with us.
It's good to be with you, John.
Well, how would you assess the chances of getting something out of the Senate that will also satisfy the House?
Well, I think the chances are pretty good, and one reason the chances are pretty good is the other system is collapsing. You can't look at this objectively or with any kind of intensity and realize that the current system just not serving patients well, it's not serving healthcare needs well, and it has to be changed. On the individual market, insurers just don't want to be there. You know, we have 115 counties in my state. 97 of them only have one company that's willing to write insurance on the individual market. 5 states only have one company that will write insurance, and some parts of some states have nobody now that will write insurance policies under Obamacare. And the people that do have policies may have coverage, but they don't have access to health care because their premiums are so high and their deductibles are so high. And so we've got to do something. I think we are going to make an unbelievably intense effort to get this done, and the House has done what they needed to do to advance the idea, to advance the bill. Now the Senate gets a chance to look at it and see what we can do to, in our opinion, improve on the House product, and then the two come together and try to create a final piece of legislation to put on the president's desk.
Those statistics are pretty dire, but I just wonder whether they have registered on the American public writ large. I mean, you look at what's happening to members of the House who've gone, on recess and are holding some of these town halls. They're getting screamed at from people who are unhappy with what the House has done on Obamacare. I mean, how do you convince people that the system is broken if that's what it is?
Well, if you look at some of the reporting and listen to some of the reporting, then if you listen to our friends on the other side, they're just outrageous, and one, refusing to look at the problem for what it is, and two, exaggerating what happens if you begin to change Obamacare. This needs to be dramatically changed. One of my Democrat colleagues mentioned last week that he might be willing to be part of a repeal and replacement strategy because the old system isn't working. President Clinton, in the campaign last year, when he was out campaigning for his wife, said, "What kind of crazy system is this? The premiums keep going up and the coverage keeps going down." Now, you can deny that if you want to all the time, but it doesn't make it less true. And part of our job is to explain to the people we work for why it is that this system has to be changed.
You may have just given us a headline there because, the concern seems to be in Republican circles. Are you going to be able to get 52 Republicans or, 50 Republicans if Mike Pence were to vote to break a tie on board with whatever it is you come up with? You're saying that some Democrats might join you?
Well, I'm saying Senator Tester said last week he might have to become part of this strategy because the system isn't working. Certainly, we ought to be open to Democrats joining us. And also, we shouldn't just pass the House bill because the House passed a bill. One of the problems with Obamacare is Senate Democrats passed a bill. House Democrats decided that the only way that bill got on the president's desk if they voted for the Senate passed bill, and all the flaws didn't have the advantage of the legislative process. I think Senator McConnell and hopefully a majority of the Senate's going to work together to be sure that this process works. We know a lot more about health care than the country did 8 years ago. Hopefully the changes will reflect how much we know and how important the country now understands these decisions are.
Well, Senator, there are political observers, prognosticators who say they see a wave election coming up because of Republican efforts to repeal and replace Obamacare, and that it is potentially going to cost Republicans control of the House. Do you see that?
I think doing the right thing here is the best thing to do, and that's how we ought to move forward. Remember, this is the spring of 2017, not the spring of 2018. So plenty of time to look at what gets done, explain what gets done, and also I think you're going to see other insurance companies drop out of the insurance market. In eastern Tennessee, a pretty big city, Knoxville, and the 15 counties around it have no insurance company that's willing to offer insurance on the individual market. And frankly, one of the good things, I guess, that happened was we were afraid when there was a real sense when Obamacare passed that people would lose insurance at work because these exchanges would be so attractive. Almost none of that has happened. Most people still are covered at work or by a government program like Medicare and Medicaid. We need to be sure the rest of America has the same kind of access to health care that all of those people do.
Well, as the Senate gets underway, we hope you'll come back and talk with us again about how it's going. Senator,
I'd be glad to.
Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri, thank you.
Very interesting there. In the meantime, overseas, France on alert as police search for 3 men suspected of plotting an ISIS-inspired attack. A ticket vendor at a busy Paris train station thought he recognized one suspect, and that set off a security scare, temporarily closing the station. Benjamin Hall is following the story live from our London bureau. Benjamin?
Well, hi, Jenna. Well, this is a constant reminder that France remains under the threat of attack, that they feel nervous that one could be carried out, but also that they will respond quickly and immediately if a possible attack is to happen. And this is exactly what happened on Monday night after they received this tip-off, quickly shutting down one of Paris's biggest transit hubs, the Gare du Nord, with police pouring into the station. Between 20 and 30 police vans massed outside, with officers wearing balaclavas and carrying assault weapons. The operation was in response to a tip-off that possible attackers suspected of plotting an ISIS-style attack were entering the station on a high-speed train. A ticket vendor in the north town of Valenciennes near the Belgian border thought she had recognized one of the 3 men from police photos, but those police have not yet been found and they remain at large. The operation came just one day after a tense presidential election that was won by the independent Emmanuel Macron. Now, he has said that one of his top priorities will be ensuring France's security as the country remains under a state of emergency following a series of Islamic extremist-inspired attacks. And now that ISIS are on the back foot in both Iraq and Syria, there is greater concern that fighters from Europe might flee back and carry out more attacks in the homeland. There are said to be thousands of European fighters out there, and so that well-trodden route used by refugees is becoming a cause for concern. Jenna?
Benjamin, thank you.
There has been an arrest in the cold case murder of a young couple on a camping trip sleeping on a beach in California. But will the charges against the suspect stick? Our legal panel weighs in next.